and we should be seeing that. Yeah. Oops. Perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time at this point to perhaps watch the recording on it, anyways, to maybe to show up and watch the live version. So, of living with others and conflict resolutions. My name is Ilaria Peavy, and I'm the Housing and Transition Supports Coordinator. And I'm co-presenting with a colleague, and I'm happy if you want to say a few words and introducing yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Kaylee Skinner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the coordinator of campus housing at Strait Area Campus, which is one of the campuses in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. So closer to Newfoundland than Yarmouth.
Fantastic. Just a few housekeeping items, and I know that many students have been in my sessions before, but still, you're joining the session with your microphone muted, and even if you're joining later, and you also will not be able to use the webcam in that sense, but you can ask any questions by using the chat. And if you're watching the recording and then you come up with a question later, please send us an email using the housing@nscc.ca. And of course, the presentation is being recorded, and you will have access upon request both to the presentation slides and the recording. So just to keep that in mind.
So I'd like to welcome you all to Turtle Island, which is also known as Canada. I speak from Mi'kmaq, the unceded territory and ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. To learn more about Mi'kmaq Nation, their rich culture, it's equally important to learn about this. If you're already in Nova Scotia, you can start by clicking the link on this presentation, which may be provided to you, and also going into NSCC Connect and looking up Treaty People, First Nations, and there's a list of resources there. We are still impacted by treaties to this day, and we are all treaty people.
Thank you. Let me see if I can advance the slides. Perfect. So what are the goals of this session? The name is very powerful. It's, when you're reading about conflict and conflict resolutions, you might think about maybe it doesn't really concern me. I never want to create any conflict. We just thought that it was a good way to have a presentation to identify some common conflicts and situations that students encounter when they live with roommates. We know that sometimes it's a fantastic experience, sometimes it's not so easy. And we really wanted to get some, to learn some strategies to deal with these conflicts and issues in a positive way, perhaps like the most positive way possible. And also understand where your rights really kick in. Like sometimes students find themselves in situations that can be also dangerous. So what are your tenant rights, or and how can you manage those conflicts, especially when they involve property owners, so that the people you're renting from. And over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Ilaria. We're going to cover conflict resolution's basic steps. This is very helpful for folks with roommates or, again, with landlords. So when you're doing conflict resolution, one of the primary things you want to do is identify what is bothering you and why. Arrange a time to chat with your roommates and or landlord. And make sure you're using I feel statements, check for understandings, and look for a solution to compromise. So you might be wondering what I feel statements are. Ilaria, we can switch to the next slide here. So I feel statements are ways to help communicate that minimize the a potential for continued conflict and lower the defensiveness of the other individual in that conversation. A lot of the times when you start the communication with a non-confrontational way, like I feel statements, the other individual is going to match or mirror you, and it will help de-escalate conflict while discussing difficult conversations. So you start by stating your own feelings first, These statements take practice, and it is completely okay to rehearse some of the things that you're going to say when you have that meeting with your roommate or other individual. So some examples of I feel statements. If you wanted to say, you never clean up, and your frustration is that the kitchen is never clean, you can switch it to, when I feel stressed when the kitchen is not clean when I'm cooking. It would be really helpful for me and my wellness if we could clean the kitchen. Instead of saying, you are so rude, I feel really disrespected and upset when you don't turn down the music when I ask. So you're taking it from a blame-based statement to a statement based in your feelings that still gets the message of what you're saying and what's upsetting to you across, but does it in a way to minimize conflict and also center it down in a non-confrontational based communication style. So when you use I feel statements, and when you're trying to fix conflict, there's often no perfect fix. You're going to have to often work together with the person that you are in conflict with to find a compromise that can help you both live in a positive environment, or at least in a environment that is not negative and not filled with this conflict. So when you start that conversation for I feel statements, you want to make sure you're taking time to understand the other perspective, so that you're able to get the buy-in from the other person. You're able to understand where they're coming from. So for example, if a roommate plays music loudly until 11 p.m. and you want to go to bed at 8:30, you can say, I feel really not great when you have the music loud until 11 p.m. And you learn that the other person feels that they need to have that music loud to study and focus. So what compromise is, okay, well, I want to go to bed at 8:30 and you study until 11 p.m. At 8 p.m., can you put headphones on so I can go to sleep? And that way you can both get a solution, and you can be open to ideas from the other roommate so that you can both agree on a compromise. It's great to say what you want, but without actually hearing and listening what the other person has to say, there's little opportunity to find that compromise that will help benefit both of you in conflict resolution. Because you need to have buy-in from the other individual to solve said conflict. We can switch to the next slide. So you've had the I feel conversation, you've figured out a compromise, but now you're like, what if this happens again? This is a great time to reset your boundaries. So after a conflict, after you have those conversations, if you already have an agreement between you about some of the common roommate issues, you can say, okay, well, we agreed that music would be shut off at 10, but you're finding that you need to study till 11. So maybe we need to alter this agreement and these guidelines. You can also remind the roommate of the agreed upon guidelines when you're having that conversation and suggest that you refresh it to minimize future conflict. However, if there's no guidelines that you haven't set guidelines together, you should probably do that sometime after these conversations. And again, remember to focus on potential compromises, and you need to have the roommate or other individuals buy-in to have meaningful action and change in a positive way. Without having their buy-in, there's minimal opportunities for positive change. And so if you haven't set those guidelines before, you want to potentially do this afterwards. Say, okay, we've had a conversation about this. I want to be able to set some guidelines so that there isn't miscommunication in the future where I feel poorly and you feel poorly. So how about we come together in a week and highlight some of the aspects that we want. A lot of the common conflicts with roommates are around cleanliness, guest, noise, and borrowing items. So you can say, for example, I want a clean kitchen when I'm cooking. So maybe we can discuss how we can both have that as a guideline or find a compromise but let's both take some time to think about what we want and to come together and write these guidelines together. And the reason I'm saying you might want to separate and come together afterwards is when you have these difficult conversations with roommates, and then you set, okay, well, we need guidelines. The other individual may feel like they don't have enough time to prepare what they might want and might not have the buy-in to the guidelines that are set in that meeting. So having both individuals, yourself and the other person, reflect on what they want, come back and find those compromises and middle grounds is a really important. And the reason I keep saying compromise is because that's really the best way to solve conflict. However, there are situations where compromise can be challenging, can be really difficult, and may not even be possible. And so I'm going to hand it over to Ilaria for when things get tough.
Sorry for switching slides a little bit earlier. I
That's
was
all
trying to
right.
understand when it was time. So, and thank you for your presentation. I'm taking over for like when things get really complicated, and especially I was thinking about a couple of case scenarios based on what the students tell me that that they feel. I think like a lot of conflict can really start when you're asked to leave or when you decide to leave. Being asked to leave sometimes is done because the person you're renting from like all of a sudden needs a room or the place back or they decide to sell. But I see that a lot of conflicts really start when students decide to leave and they don't communicate this appropriately or they don't know exactly how to do so. Or really when when things get a lot complicated and the things escalate when they are being threatened, because it could also happen. So I just want to clarify a few things. Starting with something very difficult that I hope I made a little bit easier, which is the notice to quit. Basically, when you when you sign a lease or an agreement or a contract, and I hope that all of you have signed something, not just agreed verbally on or renting a place. It will be written, or depending on how you're paying your rent, it will be written the terms of the lease. So with this, I mean that if you're renting on a monthly basis, so like you have a monthly lease, you're paying on month-to-month rent for your monthly contract and lease. You need to give your notice to quit, so letting the person you're renting from know that you're leaving in a different way than if you're renting on a yearly lease or fixed term lease. So the first case, monthly lease, you need to give your notice to quit 1 full month before you wish to move out. And pay attention, because a full month is not the same as 30 days. And I see many students who say, I don't know what happened in the miscommunication, but I wanted to leave in that month, and now it looks like I have to pay. And and I'm really stressed because it's not how things were supposed to go, and the property owner is stressed with me or my roommates or so on. So let's clarify this. So the notice must be given at least 1 day before the beginning of the last month before you want to move out. Say that you don't want to stay in a place past the end of November, and so it's October now. We say like November is my last month. I don't want to pay rent for December 1st because I'm moving out, I'm finding a place, whatever. You must give notice no later than October 31st. So by giving notice by October 31st, you're giving the full month of November. That's what you need to do. Otherwise, it will keep paying rent for the month of December. So be careful here. On a yearly lease is different, because you need to give your notice to quit 3 full months before the anniversary date. The anniversary date is the day 30 that you enter into the lease agreement. So not the end of that month, but like the 30th. So thinking about the example before, you would need to give notice by October 30th, and then you will have 3 months. So like the entire month of November, the entire month of December, the entire month of January, not to pay for February. So keep that in mind. And you understand how this becomes a little bit difficult if you're not signing a contract. So that's why in your agreement or contract that you're signing, it's very important and everything is written down. Because in words, it could be different. It could be like, oh, you can come and go whenever you want, or you're free to leave, or very easy, flexible, and then you do that. And they'll be like, no, you owe me this and that. So The last example would be the fixed or term lease, and you do not need to give notice because on your lease it will be exactly written when is your last day that you own and rent, and you're allowed to leave. So the lease will be automatically end on a day specified. However, the person you're renting from must give you permission to keep renting after the fixed term is over. So if you reach the end of your lease and the property owner does not ask you to leave and you do not sign a new lease, you will still lease, but be careful because it will be automatic, but like on a month-to-month lease, and then all the rules apply. So you will receive this presentation if you want. So and sometimes students really need to clarify. So always think a little bit ahead in terms of when I want to leave, what do I do? And something else that I also wanted to talk about is when actually students experience, maybe racism, rude comments, or you're verbally or even physically threatened. And I very often speak to students who are vulnerable, or even international students who are even more worried about reporting incidents to the police because they don't want to maybe have any problems with don't want to create any troubles. They're really worried about the study permit situation or something. Or depending on your experience in life, both in Canada and abroad, you might have been treated differently, depending on what happened in your life by the police, or your family members might have experienced that in not in a positive way. I still really want to say that your safety comes first. You will not be in trouble for reporting incidents to the police, and there are supports available on campus should you need to, to maybe to need encouragement. Or I'm thinking about our student advisors for support. They will always be happy to support you in making a claim or report the incidents to the police. But the first thing would be really trying not to engage in the same behavior. Like if someone is insulting you, don't try not to insult them back. Don't escalate it. Be detached and objective and professional in that sense. Record all evidence of mistreatment, but also of any communication that could be, I paid my rent and they say, no, I owe you nothing. Like I don't want to give you a deposit back or any sort of thing. And remember that while you're keeping evidence of mistreatment or of insult or everything, they might also be doing the same. And if there was the unfortunate event that you need to be taken to court and you need to explain your situation, they will also use some evidence with you. So that's why I wanted to say don't escalate and really try to stay calm in that sense. Something that is always good practice, I would say, is to take videos of how you're leaving the place. And we in webinars that we had before, we were always spoken about when you're inspecting a place to get to live in first. And so you want to take pictures and videos and everything of the place, how you're finding it, but also when you're leaving it. Because it wouldn't be the first time that someone says you've broken the fridge or you've broken the window, and I'm taking, I'm keeping your deposit and I'm not giving it back to you. So when you have proof of what happened or has not happened, then things, it's much easier to solve conflicts. I was renting in a place once, and when I left, they took all my pictures. I didn't really trust the company. I knew that they were sort of lying in many things, and I was accused of having of breaking a fridge or an appliance, and so my deposit was kept, and I was able to get back to them and said it must be a misunderstanding or a mistake from your part. Here are the pictures. I haven't broken anything, and that's how I got my deposit back. So it's really important that you keep your evidence. If you ever need any, I would say, free legal advice, you can always call Dial Legal Aid, and they have an email and a phone number. They have lawyers. They are students, so they are studying law, but they will not charge you, so you get free advice, which can be very, very useful in terms of learning how to do things and how to move forward. But your first point at the college would be the housing person that you can contact to the housing email that you see there. I've also included a tenant rights guide for Nova Scotia, which is written beautifully. I think it's Dal Legal Aid that put it together, and it's very easy to read. It's not the legal language that can be very, very difficult to interpret or to read. The guide will really explain you notice to quit, how it works, but like deposit and all the things you really need to know to de-escalate conflicts or just or not even to get there. So I think it's really a valuable resource that you have. This would be it, like the end of our presentation. So I am just going to stop perhaps sharing my screen just to see if we have any question that I don't think we have at the moment. Anything else that you think maybe we should discuss that would be useful for our students? Any case that maybe you can think about from the past or?
I think you've covered it all really well, Ilaria. Just want to reiterate that conflicts are very challenging. It takes a lot of confidence and strength to speak up and have these conversations. And there are supports at NSCC, housing at NSCC being one of them, your student services advisor being another, that folks can reach out to connect with to help build some of the skills to have these conversations. And that it's okay to plan out these conversations and not feel like you need to go in and just you can be fully prepared, you can be over
Yes.
prepared, you can have things written down. Conflicts very challenging, and just use the resources that you have available to help support you through these challenging waters.
Yes, that's perfect. And the last thing I'll probably mention is don't wait until too late. There are many things that really get on our nerves and we would like to maybe discuss and then we don't because we're busy, we forget. It's like, no, I'm sure it's nothing. And then everything bursts out. And then all of a sudden you're having an awful discussion about maybe a dish or something that was in the wrong place. So don't, and that's obviously is a sign that many little things accumulated and then they weren't discussed. So I would say don't wait until late, and especially when you're renting with someone, it's very important that you keep asking, questions. And we've said in many webinars, if there's a problem with your house, please make sure that you are notifying the person you're renting from. Sending them an email, keep track, keep everything in writing. Because if you just call someone and you said there's a leaky window, there's something happened, and they might forget, and it's not very good for you when you leave. So you really want to have everything recorded, and that would really help having good tenancy and informing very good conversations.
And the one piece off of that also, Ilaria, is if you are having these verbal conversations and you expect the conflict to escalate, even though you are trying to de-escalate it, make a note of the time and dates. Send it via writing, via text. Hey, remember, we're going to have that conversation about some things tonight at dinner. And then have a note at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, October 10th. Ilaria and I discussed this, and just a brief summary of what was said, because that helps if anything does escalate beyond when you have been doing verbal conversations and you don't have things in writing. At least you have a journal of the steps you've taken, which helps keep things a little bit accountable if you did have to go to Dal legal aid or any legal action.
Absolutely. Well, perfect. So I will just stop the recording. Do I want to stop?